Welcome to the MSDW Podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor of MSDynamicsWorld.com. This week, we will review recent news from Microsoft and from the Dynamics channel. I'm joined by our assistant editor, Dan Morneau, and we'll be looking at some compelling Azure news. Why are Microsoft and SAP cozying up? VMware migrations up for discussion. And an outsider's view on what NAV developers are excited about. There'll also be another look at GDPR, standing up a Dynamics 365 practice, and a little bit more. So, hey, Dan, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much, and good to be on the podcast again. Let's move right into the news. First off, in Azure news, Microsoft and SAP expand partnership with S/4HANA and Azure commitments. This was by you, Jason.
Right. So this was, I think you would call it the next phase of the Microsoft SAP partnership relationship. It's a long-standing one, one in which it has a lot of layers to it, I guess you would say, and always and has for some time. Microsoft has supported SAP as an ISV partner essentially for many years in terms of supporting the SAP software on Microsoft servers with Microsoft infrastructure like database for some of its solutions and so forth. And I think on the other side, SAP has been a big consumer of Microsoft technology, and so have many of its customers. So that and that's always been, well, for many years anyway, it's been a generally positive relationship. The fact that they compete in the ERP and CRM space has they've sort of been able to navigate it, I guess you would say. Of course, they do compete, and it's the kind of thing that in the Dynamics channel, they don't think too kindly of SAP and don't really wish them all that well. But I think there's those other parts, those other interests in Microsoft that support that partnership have a different view, and that's always been the one that's sort of won out in that regard. So with that in mind, the new round of announcements isn't all that surprising. Probably, and the analysts I spoke with to get a little perspective on it, see it as a positive step for both companies. That they'll probably both benefit. And just to get into the particulars, so there were, I think, two or three components, but Microsoft will support running SAP S/4HANA on Azure. They'll also be supporting the use of SAP HANA Enterprise Cloud on Azure, or HEC. And the other one that really got my attention thinking about the Dynamics perspective on things is that Microsoft is going to continue using SAP for its financials and operations by adopting SAP S/4HANA on Azure. And so that is sort of an indication that, and they've run SAP, financials for many years. It's something that they did sort of almost predated Dynamics, and it's something they'll just continue to do. And I don't think this was a major component of the announcement that SAP and Microsoft will be running S/4HANA on Azure. And so the question of, well, why didn't Microsoft consider using its own ERP on Azure was its own ERP in the cloud at this point in time was one question that's come up by a few people, and I think we answered it pretty well, given the input that I got from talking to Josh Greenbaum of Enterprise Application Consultants and Rebecca Wetterman, VP of Research at Nucleus Research, and they both had some interesting things to say about the deal and what it really means. I mean, I think the bottom line, and I also talked to a Microsoft partner on this, a veteran AX partner, and I think anyone who kind of understands what SAP can offer and what Microsoft has done with SAP over the years versus what Dynamics AX and now Dynamics 365 can do, kind of knows that really wasn't probably seriously considered for too long. The idea of a company with the profile of Microsoft, which is not a very common profile, given it's one of the very biggest companies in the world and has probably some of the most complex financial needs. The idea of them turning themselves over or trying to sort of develop Dynamics 365 to suit their needs, it probably just was too much of an ask. It's a solution that is not built for these kind of like massive global enterprise software company of the size that Microsoft is, um, so it probably just wasn't going to get them where they needed to go for their own internal financial needs. And there's an interesting quote about from Josh Greenbaum about some of the things that S4 HANA Finance can do, and some of the analytical capabilities. So, to him, and I think to Rebecca as well, and I think to a lot of Dynamics AX veterans who kind of know that history, it wasn't maybe a huge surprise, but. On the other side, there were people who I think are already, a little bitter about it. I think you might have seen a couple of the comments that are out there.
Yes, I did. Cranky, I would say.
Yeah, a bit cranky. I think a bit maybe disappointed, but I would just respectfully disagree with those people. I think it isn't that much of a disappointment. I think it's not. I think you just have to ask a question: does Microsoft want to build Dynamics 365 into something that really suits, massive global corporations for their sort of central core financial management and operational needs, or does it want to build something that's in the, sort of $1 billion to $10 billion, enterprise range that it's already sort of suited for, and just make it a better product for that segment, or somewhere around that segment, I guess. And I think if you think about that question, I think it really is a different kind of solution that they're aiming to invest in and build for the future. So, probably not as big of an issue or a item to complain about as some people make it out to be. That's my take, and it was interesting from my own perspective to sort of chat with a few people about this, just to sort of remind myself too why that is.
In our current political environment, you see flash judgments, and I see the same thing in the industry press. Why would you two, collaborate at all? It shakes my confidence in you, Microsoft, that you use SAP internally. It's a flash judgment, and it's right. kind of an unsophisticated one, frankly.
It's, and I guess the other point I would add there is, I'll try to post a link to it, but so Rebecca Wetterman had a very interesting blog post separate from this, where she sort of compared, enterprise software partnerships to sort of the corporate Tinder kind of a thing, where a lot of them just don't last. They're sort of very fleeting, and they sound good up front, and they don't go anywhere after the initial press releases are done. And I absolutely agree. I mean, there are a lot of those, and she pointed some very good examples. But I thought also of like this one, SAP and Microsoft, as really a lasting partnership of sorts. They've been able to, it's not all roses, but they've been able to make it work, much like a real relationship. And I think another one that came to mind just in reading that characterization was the Microsoft and Adobe one, which isn't related here directly, but I think it's another partnership that I now see as one that really has some strong roots to it, that the two companies really do seem to have some level of commitment. I mean, it's still not that old of a relationship, but that's another example, I think, of a strong one, as opposed to, by comparison, Microsoft and Salesforce, which seems to have kind of fizzled, and they're no longer answering each other's texts. I don't think one of them.
They're not even frenemies anymore. So, no,
but
indeed.
It really does play into that. There's that whole realm, that whole spectrum of different kinds of partnerships, and how well they survive.
Yeah, indeed.
And we have one more here, right? One more sort of partnership / non-partnership next on our list.
Sure. This is Azure Migrate enables frictionless VMware migrations, but rubs VMware the wrong way. Here, citing much demand, Microsoft announced Azure Migrate. This again is for migrating VMware environments to Azure. It's designed to put VMware virtualized Windows and Linux virtual machines onto Azure, but VMware is kind of advising against a migration solution that it didn't help to engineer. Now, Microsoft first announced this limited preview at Ignite in September and has seen, it says, considerable response for it. So it's designed to provide a detailed and visual assessment of migration readiness, and it is really slick. The visuals that I've seen, people talk about, we will visualize this for you. Here you see pretty much every node anywhere in the network which could possibly migrate. I was very impressed with that. Now, for the last week, though, Microsoft and VMware have kind of bristled at one another, specifically over the more complex VMware infrastructures for virtualization on Azure. And I'm reading here a quote from VMware. No VMware certified partner names have been mentioned, nor have any partners collaborated with VMware in engineering this offering. Here they're talking about Microsoft or Microsoft partners. So it was developed independent of VMware completely. It's not certified by them. And they're arguing, go with one of our partners, IBM or AWS or Amazon. So, but VMware sort of turned around and patted Microsoft on the head and said, "We understand. Of course, you if you must go virtualize." That it's understandable that you want alignment with us. We're the world leader. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But they are recommending, if you really want to, want to migrate a VMware environment, do it with one of our partners, which sort of makes sense, but on the other hand,
well, I think there's a little subtext also, and I should have mentioned this with the previous piece as well, and that's that AWS, their big event of the year is happening this week, and so Microsoft sort of artfully put out this announcement, right at the start of that week of the AWS reInvent, which which is what these software companies do if they're not sort of driving a bus around in front of the conference hall. They're putting out press releases trying to make a little noise, which is what I think Microsoft did with both this VMware announcement to sort of take a little attention away from Amazon's relationship with VMware or with SAP and hosting of SAP for HANA. But yeah, it's always a little bit fun to see these companies sort of spar with each other as they're doing here. Probably not a lot else that I can add in terms of virtualization expertise to sort of comment on it, but certainly some sort of positions taken from the various companies here.
I got a feeling that in a month, I think very quickly we're going to hear a couple of decent stand-up case studies from some of the major partners, and this will have. I'm sure partners might be looking at each other and saying, "You go first." But
yeah, it's who's got the stronger relationship with which of the vendors is going to determine who stands up and shows this one off first. I agree. All right, what do we have next here?
Moving on in Dynamics news, tell us about this Dynamics 365 AX tip-off.
Okay, let me tell you about that briefly. So this was just a day ago. Since at the time of recording this, I was invited to be a judge in what was being billed as a Dynamics 365 AX tip-off. It was an episode of the Dynamics podcast run by Frederick Satra and Tommy Scowe, and it was a lot of fun.
It's comparing oranges.
We'll put a link to it. It's on YouTube, and it was really. I was just a judge. It was really a little fun competition of sorts between Murray Fife and Chad Carnes, two AX experts, and it was a little bit like a dunk contest or like. Maybe a boxing match. It was about 10 rounds of tips, and they would each go head to head and show off a tip. and we'd pick a winner on each round and give points. I won't give away who won. It was very close, and they really did both do an awesome job. It reminded me why I always get frustrated with sports that are judged, boxing or diving or anything like that. When we put things in the hands of judges, it doesn't always reflect the the best or anything like that. It's just how the points work out, and a lot of it's too hard to judge. And this was the case here. They both took a very different approaches. They have different strengths, but it was a lot of fun for me to see how two different people with different perspectives and different expertise, take Dynamics 365 and sort of wring the best out of it, and bring to your attention the kinds of value that the customers should be getting out of it, whether they, and oftentimes I think a lot of these tips are things that are underused. So I hope customers pay attention to it and get some ideas, because there's like 20 good ideas there out of the two of them. And Chad, who I didn't know as well, it was very interesting to see his perspective around some of the around really kind of internalizing the importance of reporting, not just as doing a BI segment to a project, but sort of baking in some of the reporting ideals or competency from early on in a project. And even just from these tips, he was able to really kind of communicate that, which I think was great. I will also say, I don't think I could ever run a podcast that was all recorded on YouTube every week and having myself on video. It's just a lot of sitting in front of the camera from my perspective. So Dan, I'm glad to be back on our podcast. It's a bit of a relief to just be talking into a mic today.
And nobody cares what you're wearing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm wearing ugly fleece now.
I am not a lovely sight today. I will say that. So, yeah. Well, congratulations. That's I find those compelling. There's some great minds out there. I'd love to hear them come together. So, I can't wait to give that a listen.
Yeah, it's a bit long. It's a couple hours, but there's a lot of great material in there, and the the rest of the people on the podcast were all a lot of fun and really nice. So it was a good time.
Sure. Next up, a report on NAV Tech Days, and this was written by you, Jason.
Yeah, I just wanted to cover this briefly because I wasn't at this event, but I was watching from afar, and I feel like I got a fairly decent sense of what was going on there. It was well documented on Twitter, and I think all the presentations have been posted online. This is an annual event that's really dedicated toward NAV developers and those who love NAV-related technology. NAV Tech Days 2017. It seemed to be a really enthusiastic audience. It was in, I think it was in the Netherlands this year, and it was, from my perspective, I'm obviously not a NAV developer, and we don't tend to cover sort of the deep dives into that topic. But I was just looking through, and I made a little Storify story on some of the topics I thought were most interesting. And at the highest level, the thing I took away was how much enthusiasm the NAV developer community has for all the technology that Microsoft is rolling out that's sort of peripheral to NAV, things that could be used with it, that should be used with it, and that includes just going through a list of some of those that I saw that were really, these were topics that really seemed to be featured in various presentations, not just mentioned off to the side, but Azure Functions, Office 365, obviously, Microsoft Graph, which seems like it's going to play a very important role in the NAV API, the NAV/Dynamics 365 Tenerife web API that's near launch or in the process of being launched. Visual Studio Code, Docker, which is, I think, going to be a huge component of how developers work with NAV in the future for containerization. Power Apps played a role, which I thought was very interesting because it's really more of almost a power user tool, though not quite, and Common Data Service. So those were all topics that were up for discussion at that event a couple weeks back here. I think it was about 2 weeks ago today, and that was I think worth noting because what the developers are focused on is oftentimes going to be going to drive, I think, what customers end up getting delivered in the end. Those are the tools they're going to be working with. So yeah, I just wanted to call attention to NAV Tech Days 2017.
Great, great. And next up, we have some expert opinion pieces. These are guest editorials and Q&As. And first off, in the area of compliance, Microsoft Dynamics 365 and GDPR. What do customers and partners really think? And this is by Mohammed Mustafa, Microsoft Dynamics 365 MVP, and I think he heads the CRM boutique over there. Now, he's describing some new data from a survey and a recent panel that he oversaw with the UK chapter of CRMUG. And interestingly, here he was looking at, he was querying, the customers and what capabilities they expect Dynamics 365 to deliver to help them to get closer to compliance. And interestingly, he found that companies are not so concerned about their internal staffs whatsoever. They're concerned about their customers. They're concerned that their customers are going to get them in Dutch or out of compliance with GDPR. So companies seem to esteem themselves fairly well on, say, compliance activities like data subject requests from staff members. But what they are saying is that their first level customers, their C1s, here's where future Dynamics 365 features and capabilities could have a far more positive impact. So they're expecting Dynamics 365 to help them essentially police their customers more than police themselves. So I find that compelling. I just wonder what features they would use to do that.
I read it a little different, or I have a different suspicion about it. Let's say that they're more worried about their customers than their internal staff. I think from what I've in a few conversations about GDPR I've had, I mean, the internal staff angle is still a huge risk in terms of GDPR compliance. I think it's just a matter of where you're going to spend your money to try to figure out how to achieve compliance or how to handle these kinds of requests. And I can see why. I guess no surprise that customers are number one when it comes to having a story that shows that you can follow GDPR.
Yeah.
But there's a survey. I think it was interesting that these survey questions are out there, and I'll post a link in the podcast right up here about that survey. I think it's still open, and it would be great if other people share their views, because we'll be able to report on what those findings were from Mohammed. And it's I think it's an interesting way to start prioritizing some of this stuff, because GDPR, I mean, people are really scratching their heads trying to figure out what is really going to happen with it once it goes into effect. What kind of demands can people really make under its auspices, or what will it really end up looking like? I heard one theory, it'll have like one page of what it is, and then 1,000 or 2,000 pages of what it isn't. And sort of in the EU regulation once it's sort of put into effect, just because of all the possibilities of what it could mean. What if an internal user who leaves the company demands that their name is taken off every transaction they did on every, from accounting, if they were, in the accounting department, they don't want their name or their user ID associated with those, thousands of transactions that they did over 5 years or something. What is that really going to mean for your systems?
Sure.
And is that reasonable? I don't know.
I don't know either, but a second question from this survey, and I found this very compelling, is about confidence in the hybrid cloud model. Now, usually when you talk compliance, folks pucker up. They think, well, we got to be on premise. We got to keep things, within our four walls, and yet now they're looking at least these folks that we're talking to, who are necessarily Dynamics 365 familiar. Their other customers are migrating there, are saying they've got absolute confidence in this model. 88% of them do. So to me, this is a real kind of, it may be a watershed, or at least a strong indicator that all those caveats about customer confidence in the hybrid model, there doesn't appear to be that anymore.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what exactly has caused people to be so overwhelming about that. I can say one reason could be when you listen to Microsoft, they clearly are taking GDPR seriously, and probably they've been, I think for a lot of companies, you might say in a general sense, I don't trust my, I don't want to look at putting my systems in the cloud, or I don't trust it, just in a general way. But then, well, when it comes to something like planning for GDPR compliance, Microsoft's done all this work. Okay, maybe I'll give that a second look and figure out a way to take advantage of the work they've done to cover myself. And it becomes just a very different risk reward equation in a context like this. That could be one reason why, because I think Microsoft is sounding the alarm, and they've got this GDPR compliance sort of site, which doesn't really apply to Dynamics in any direct way that I've seen. Perhaps it has peripheral ways to gain some tools that will help you. But that might be more than a lot of companies have done. 4 months or 5 months out here from the deadline.
Sure. Yeah. Well, next up we have
not the last we'll hear about GDPR, I'm sure.
Oh, no. It's when does it go into effect? May of 2018? Well, it officially, I think, goes into effect January 1st, 2018, or day one of FY 2018, which
that
could
May date is the one I keep hearing for really the drop dead date.
Yeah. Tell you the truth, when I edit a story about it, I wind up having to sort of hedge my bets because I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
I can't
not
tell.
The only one.
I can't tell. Next up, we have a few partner and channel strategies pieces, and first up, we had an executive Q&A with MindsUnited's CEO Arjen Janssen about the fact that, or rather, we called it MindsUnited on standing up a CRM for SMB practice. As he puts it, or he intimates, the implementation is the easy part. It turns out that, it can be very tricky to, once again, strike up this practice. But if you're busy with an Office practice and a SharePoint practice, you can indeed, along with the help of someone like MindsUnited, you can indeed stand that up quickly. On the other hand, he's observing out there right now a sort of a buyer's strike, wherein with the Dynamics 365 business, with that being more or less, what would you call it? I wouldn't say sunset. I would say more or less taken off the menu.
Yeah. Sort of a purgatory state, or a sort of limbo state.
Yeah. Well, there are customers out there, again, in the midst of this buyer's strike, who think, well, I keep hearing about these magnificent SMB products in development, and if I haven't, there's probably going to be one, and the walls aren't coming down. I'll just sit this out for a little while. So that's a compelling read. That's, once again, with MindsUnited's Arjen Janssen. Next up, we had another executive Q&A, how to accelerate the Microsoft Dynamics NAV channel's cloud journey. And here we were talking to SaaSplaza, where they told us that the channel more or less can't wait to embrace the cloud when born in the cloud ERP providers are eager for their business. And here, of course, they need to align with cloud partners like SaaSplaza, who are going to help them stand that up quickly. Third, we have, and this was an interesting read, the evolution of a Microsoft Dynamics ISV. This is by Michael Anderson, who's founder of Dynamics NAV add-ons. This company has numerous add-ons. You won't find them on AppSource, and I don't know if they have plans to go there, but regardless, it is I think at this point, a more than a decade-old ISV. And Michael Anderson describes the journey, and as he describes, there's tremendous opportunity to develop solutions that support Microsoft Dynamics, but no, it's not effortless. No, you can't do it in a week, and no, you can't. At one point, he found you can't entirely trust the partner with whom you co-develop. So that's a compelling read.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It's great to get a first-person accounting of what it took to not only come up with an idea for a software business, but to then actually, follow through with all the investment that went into and the risk that went into making it happen and making it sustainable. It was no small. It wasn't like, hey, here's a great idea. Let's just sort of throw it together and turn it into a business. It was a lot of sacrifice and risk involved.
Yeah, I mean, you hear the term, but no, you cannot spin up a solution. No, you cannot.
It can be done, but it's not trivial in any way, shape, or form.
No. And finally, this was a Dynamics 365 profile of Mexican Microsoft MVP achieves professional growth through community goals. And here we interviewed Sergio Macias in Mexico, who finds his knowledge much in demand and he shares it broadly. And I found this one just a pretty compelling read of he isn't sure, but he believes he is the first Dynamics 365 MVP in Mexico.
Yeah, it's good for him, and it's pretty cool. I think it's so interesting to. One of the reasons I like these MVP profiles so much, or just dynamic profiles we do of people in the community who often happen to be MVPs, is how they embrace this community mindset. And I think Sergio's no exception there. I think, and a lot of times seems like some people just naturally do it, but other times it's like they have to sort of be enlightened to the idea. And once they are, they sort of take it on full throttle. And I mean, he's got at least 3 different organizations he is involved with today, and I wouldn't be surprised if even that list is growing, or his involvement in them is going to continue to grow, because I think that's really been what I think that's what probably helped him get nominated for the MVP award. Actually, I think it was his involvement in Comunidad 365, and then all the other ones that he's gotten involved with.
Yeah, the way he describes it, he tried hard. He tried meetups. He tried other venues, just kind of, but nobody returned his calls. And then he was an MVP. Now they're phoning him.
Yeah, that's a great anecdote there. All of a sudden, everyone trusts him. It's amazing what that award status sort of does to everyone. It just makes it easy for everyone to say, okay, Microsoft believes in you. I believe in you.
Yeah.
So it's hard to understate the value there.
Yeah, I didn't trust you, but I trust Microsoft. Nice. I don't know if I'd be so quick to forgive. Where I am. Well, let's move on, Jason. What stories do you have coming up next week?
Well, I know we have a few different interesting things coming up. The thing I'm starting to turn my attention to, since we're going into December here, is the best and the most notable things from 2017. So I'll be taking a hard look back at our 2017 reporting and features and contributions, and starting to tease out some lists and some top of the year stuff. So that's going to start to become a little bit of focus for me, as it always does at the end of the calendar year. How about you?
Sure. Well, we'll have an executive Q&A with Sandy Schwartz. He's the CEO. practice director with Incadia over in the UK. This is an automotive retail solution. Pretty interesting vertical, a very complex one, and it's got a lot in common with all retail and a lot not in common at all. So that'll be one story. We're expecting a deep dive into Dynamics 365's cost accounting module. That'll be with frequent blogger Ludwig Reinhard. We'll have a pretty compelling, I think, piece on month-end reconciliations, a more or less a maturity model, this by the folks at Catapult ERP. And finally, we'll have a great how-to from Ulrich Carlson of Elevate Solutions about when to use charts, when to use Power BI, along with a couple of other pieces.
All right, excellent. Well, Dan, why don't we start wrapping up?
Okay.
So thanks again for joining me. Always nice to sort of review where we've been in the last week or two.
Yeah.
And to everyone out there, this has been another episode of the MSDW Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com.
And I'm Dan Morneau, assistant editor, and I am at M as in Matthew, AUR, N as in Nickel, O, at msdynamicsworld.com.
Until next time, we're MS Dynamics World signing off.